Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a closer look at a convergence of, well, faith, conversion, and intelligence analysis that begins in what seems like a small, peaceful, cultural center.
Right.
And it rapidly escalates into a subject of, frankly, national security. This deep dive actually came directly from one of you, our listeners, who sent in some incredible source material that really scrutinizes the operation one specific organ.
That's right. And the source material is, it's extensive. We're looking at a collection of investigative transcripts, and these include some really agonizing personal testimonies from families, from converts themselves.
Wow.
We also have snippets of internal emails, other communications, and then this high-level ideological analysis from people with intelligence backgrounds. Our focus today is the al-Salam Center, the House of Peace, located in the community of Kafkara.
So our mission today is really to navigate this massive and honestly unsettling gap between the center's very carefully crafted public image and what this investigation ultimately uncovered. Publicly, this center was all about dukium, the concept of peaceful coexistence. But our sources, they reveal what is allegedly a highly organized, systematic engine of dawah, or proselytization.
And its explicit aim was the conversion of Jewish citizens, process they refer to as hitaslim.
Right.
I think it's essential right from the start that we kind of establish the intellectual framework here. We are not just examining a collection of, spontaneous individual religious discoveries, though that is often how the personal journeys seem to begin.
Okay, so what are we looking at?
The material strongly suggests we're instead looking at an organized, very resource-intensive ideological strategy.
A strategy.
Yes, and understanding that critical distinction between, say, genuine spiritual searching and this orchestrated, targeted recruitment is really the only way to fully grasp the profound implications that are detailed in these sources.
So we're really looking at a playbook, not just spontaneous community center.
Exactly. And the power of that playbook, as we'll see, lies in its initial gentleness and its accessibility.
Okay, so let's unpack that public image first, because that seems to be the Trojan horse. The name itself, Dar al-Salam, House of, it implies something neutral, maybe educational or cultural.
Sure, absolutely.
And the sources describe its external marketing in exactly that way. A very nice and heartfelt center that was dedicated to fostering coexistence, a place where you could learn about what they called true Islam and, take part in innocent social activities like community trip.
And the center's outward presentation was, you have to say it was masterful. It was designed specifically to appeal to vulnerability and to curiosity.
Right.
What the sources really emphasize is the methodology of that initial appeal, which they kind of boil down to what they call the warmth factor.
The warmth factor.
Yeah. This was the core component for drawing in recruits who are often feeling, alienated or just searching for something.
Tell me a bit more about this warmth factor, because the details in the sources about the human connection, they seem almost therapeutic. It's a sharp contrast with the harsh reality that gets uncovered.
It was an immediate, intense feeling of acceptance. Converts consistently describe the people at the center as warm people, overwhelmingly welcoming. Their entire initial approach was, it was incredibly intimate and affirming. They didn't just want the newcomers to listen. They genuinely wanted them to feel validated, understood. One interviewee emphasized that the center's staff made them feel, quote, most important.
Wow.
And that level of immediate affirmation is incredibly intoxicating for someone who feels overlooked or lonely.
That makes perfect sense. If you come from a background where you feel a deficit of connection and then you encounter this kind of focused, intense, positive attention, it becomes a powerful gravitational pull.
And this intense warmth was then strategically paired with guidance that sounded universally beneficial, regardless of your religious background.
So not immediately ideological.
Not at all. The initial advice was positive and simple. They focused on strengthening bonds with your parents, your family, the needy. They promoted charitable acts, sadaqah, and encouraged prayer, salah.
So they were starting with common human values, basically, building trust before they introduce any of the more, let's say, challenging theological or political concepts.
Precisely. And the core theological message was simplified to the max, just a belief in the Creator, Borei Olam. The interviewee noted that these simple positive concepts, the good advice, the kind words, this emphasis on basic family and community connection, that is exactly what balked them.
That's the word they used. It bought them.
Yes, it's what made them feel they had connected with something profound. It was accessible spiritual guidance without any immediate ideological demands.
If you are already searching, this kind of setup provides immediate meaning, structure, and just overwhelming positive reinforcement. It must have felt like a genuine...
It's the perfect net. And the source material gives us two very distinct examples of individuals who were caught in this net, highlighting two very different points of vulnerability.
Okay, let's start with the first entry point described. This interviewee, born in came from Afula, and it's described as a comfortable, sort of religious, secular home. So this isn't someone from a broken background.
Right, but someone who is intensely curious. This individual represents the curiosity-driven convert, fueled by the early days of the internet, searching for knowledge outside the established norms of their community.
Interesting.
What's really interesting is they noted the lack of severe cognitive dissonance in their own background, going from a religious Shabbat morning to mandatory army service the next day, but they were still struck by the center's warmth and inclusion. Their search was intellectual, but the connection they made was purely emotional.
And the second case study speaks directly to that emotional deficit you mentioned earlier.
It does.
This convert came from a drastically different background, a Hasidic family, grew up in a boarding school. The sources say they describe a profound loneliness and this intense search for a path that provided stability and connection.
And in this case, the draw wasn't just abstract faith, it was the perception of communal life. This individual was drawn to what they saw as the wholesome family life of Arab families, this image of everyone sitting together, living together, reinforcing the bond.
Which they felt contrasted sharply with their own past.
Exactly, especially after years in a more institutional boarding school environment.
So the initial lure wasn't a theological treatise on the Quran, but the promise of an authentic, interconnected social structure that they felt was missing from their own life.
It makes the attraction so profoundly human. That emotional pull toward belonging and a stable family life is the crucial precursor. It's what enables the subsequent ideological process to actually take hold, and that leads the individual toward thoughts of conversion, or hitasselmut.
And all the while, externally, this entire operation was shielded by this strict Dukium coexistence narrative. The sources confirm that publicly, the center absolutely avoided any discussion of hatred, incitement, or political conflict.
They maintained an image of purity. The focus was consistently on peace, love, and compassion between people. They explicitly called it the ultimate goal for all of us and claimed that they just wanted people to get to know true Islam.
So if you were vetting them from the outside,
you'd see an institution dedicated to bridging cultural gaps. Nothing.
And this dual presentation, this strategic facade, is what makes the whole investigation so complex. The center successfully positioned itself as a facilitator of essential, unbiased knowledge, even though the source material suggests it was harboring a much deeper, more radical ideological purpose. It was a perfect blend of genuine human warmth and calculated ideological recruitment. Okay, so now we have to move past that initial seduction and look at the actual human content. And the sources detail these through several, truly agonizing. These accounts reveal the brutal speed and profound emotional shock that conversion, when it's orchestrated this way, inflicted on families.
These are the stories that really lend credibility to the investigation. They demonstrate the profound loss and emotional devastation. Let's start with the father's story, which outlines that quick jump from just casual curiosity to, ideological capture.
This father relates that his daughter, starting in the 5th grade, showed curiosity about Islam, just asking questions, looking things up. He initially encouraged it. He saw it as harmless learning, just interest in a different religion. He probably thought he was fostering an open mind.
And that openness was exploited. The investigation showed that the center identifies these points of curiosity early and then isolates the individual from their family unit through that intense affirmation we talked about.
The moment of rupture was incredibly swift and violent in its emotional impact. One day, the father comes home to an empty house and finds a letter on the...
The letter stated she had left, converted to Islam, and was now living elsewhere, presumably at the center's facilities in Kafkara or a nearby affiliated residence.
And the father recounted the sheer paralyzing... He was reading the letter saying the phrase, "It can't."
It's the sound of a family unit instantly shattering.
And the center wasn't just offering spiritual guidance. They were providing full material integration. The sources detailed that the daughter was living at the center's facility, giving a monthly stipend.
So about $800 or $900 a month.
Right. And this financial security, it immediately cemented her dependence on the center, making returning home that much harder.
This stipend is crucial. It's an immediate replacement for parental support. It eliminates the financial need to return to your former life. It transforms the convert from a spiritual seeker into a financially supported ideological project.
The emotional fallout was immediate, even for the daughter herself. For the first few months, the father recounts that his daughter would call him weeping, but she never explained why she was crying or what it...
She just couldn't articulate the distress.
Or maybe felt prohibited from doing so.
That silence, the inability to explain the tears, that's a symptom of the intense psychological pressure, the isolation that's required to sever those deep familial bonds. The warmth of the center, which initially drew her in, was now being used to enforce separation.
And then 2.5 months after the disappearance, there was this glimmer of hope. She called her mother and simply said, "Mom, I'm coming home."
But she vanished immediately after.
Yeah. The father, according to the sources, never heard from her again. The complete and total disappearance of a child. It's the ultimate evidence of the trauma that was driving.
And the pattern is established right there. The initial genuine warmth and social support are rapidly replaced by material dependence and enforced isolation. It ensures the severing of previous ties becomes permanent. The tear, followed by the disappearance, it suggests a struggle between the indoctrination and her original identity that the center ultimately...
Let's move to the second case study, which illustrates the speed of the commitment they expected. This involves a young woman who had just completed her army.
Highly vulnerable transition period where your identity often feels fluid.
Exactly. She was working in a restaurant, met an Arab coworker, and was introduced to his uncle.
And the center pushes the pace, to prevent any second thoughts or any chance for intervention.
Absolutely. The speed of the process, astonishing. After just one trip to the family's village, the father of that family immediately declared that the very next day, Kira Atfat,
which the source defines as a type of formal engagement or betrothal ceremony.
Right. The woman, understandably shocked, asked, "For whom?" and was told, "For you."
Wow.
Just like that. The intention was clearly to bypass any long-term vetting process, just locking the convert into a new social, familial, and religious contract as quickly as possible. Marriage, in this context, it isn't just a personal matter, it's an ideological tool for permanent integration.
And this immediate, overwhelming pressure extended right to the conversion vow itself, the Shahada. An interviewee recounts contacting the center, seeking guidance, and immediately encountering the operational manager, this Sheikh Mercy.
And Mercy bypassed all preliminary discussion. He immediately demanded, "Before I speak to you, repeat after me," forcing the Jewish person to repeat the Islamic declaration of faith.
The convert only realized after the recitation what had actually happened.
By uttering that one phrase, they were instantly converted to Islam, right then and there.
The conversion was transactional and immediate, and the motive, as the convert realized, was purely ideological and exclusion. The sheikh's commitment was not to dialogue or curiosity. He only wanted to speak to someone who was not a kafir, an infidel or unbeliever. The conversion was literally the price of entry.
And the reinforcement that followed was instant and powerful. This is the best step in your life now, the first step toward eternal paradise, inshallah. That sealing of identity, that promise of reward, it happens before any true theological discussion.
Which just confirms the center's focus on rapid, documented, and enforced conversion.
But the risks inherent in this were terrifyingly real. The investigation unearthed connections that went far beyond mere local radicalization.
This is the moment where the investigation team's mind, as they put it, exploded.
Right. And investigators shared the story of a Jewish girl who had converted through the center, who then married a man from Kafkara who had a known history, a prior arrest and release for being a Daesh or ISIS.
And the ultimate destination for this couple was Syria, which at the time was the heart of the Daesh Caliphate.
The graphic image shared by the investigator is horrifying, but it served as crucial evidence for their investigation. Seeing a baby who was understood to be Jewish by heritage, wrapped in a Daesh ribbon.
That sight, that symbolic image, it just crystallized the danger. It led the investigators to the critical realization that what begins in Kafkara ends in Syria. The coexistence facade was hiding a pipeline to global jihad.
And this realization informed their understanding of the center's secondary, the systematic dissolution of the Jewish identity. How was that dissolution managed once the conversion was complete? It sounds like it was a continuous psychological pressure.
It wasn't one single event, it was the atmosphere. The converts felt this constant, unspoken expectation from the center that they should move forward in their new faith and cult, striving to be like them as much as possible.
So erase the past.
Essentially, yes. The aim was to ensure that the individual's Jewish identity would slowly dissolve through assimilation, social pressure, and replacement with a new, structured ideological identity. Every choice, every question, every path was rigorously directed toward complete assimilation.
The emotional trauma, the forced separation, the immediate financial dependence, and then the ultimate threat of violent radicalization. These are the real human costs that launched this serious, high-stakes investigation.
So we have established the human cost. Now we have to turn to the cold, systematic machine that engineered that cost. The entire investigation was launched pretty unexpectedly. It started with an anonymous tip.
That's right. The probe officially began when a detailed, extensive email containing actionable information about Dar al-Salam by Benzi Gopstein of Lahava.
So this was a specific targeted leak of high-value intelligence, not just a generalized complaint.
Exact. And the center used an alias steeped in history and high intelligence, Ashraf Marwan.
For our listeners who may not know, Ashraf Marwan was the famous Egyptian double agent, the son-in-law of former President Nasser. That alias immediately signals a person operating at extreme personal risk with access to highly sensitive internal information.
It was a deliberate choice. It established the stakes right away.
The sender emphasized they could not meet, that they were risking their safety by even sending the email. Yet they meticulously provided answers to the investigators' probing questions over a really protracted period.
I have to pause here. If you're the investigator, how do you manage the actual dilemma? I mean, how do you distinguish between high-level operational intelligence and a potential trap or disinformation?
That was the immediate challenge. The investigator initially treated the source with extreme skepticism. They were wondering if it was a setup, a source of false information, or, a legitimate defector. But the sheer volume, the consistency, and the specificity of the operational detail, names, dates, financial specifics, recruitment methods, it all compelled them to pursue it. They set up a dedicated communication channel to manage the exchange.
And this careful, high-risk email exchange spanned about a year and a half, revealing the staggering scale of the center's operation. What did the investigators eventually conclude about the scope?
The number shocked. They found that at any given time, many dozens of people were in simultaneous active contact with the center.
Many dozens.
Yes. And dozens more were in various stages of the conversion process, or HITAS. This was not a small-scale, opportunistic endeavor.
And the sources are clear. This wasn't random selection. This was strategic recruitment.
Correct. The evidence suggested a highly controlled, directed environment. The center was not just picking people off the street randomly. They knew who they were targeting, why those individuals were vulnerable, and what the ultimate ideological goal was for each recruit.
And the sources highlight that the center actively requested that the successful converts bring in more girls.
Right, bring in girls who were interested or just wanted to listen or be in the group.
That is classic network building. You're transforming the converts themselves into recruiters, exponentially expanding your reach within that vulnerable demographic.
It also demonstrates the trust the center placed in its converts. If they're willing to put their recruits to work recruiting new members, it confirms that the ideological buy-in was considered complete.
Which brings us directly to the financial backbone. This is the evidence that solidified the organization's systematic nature. The source material, once the email data was organized, showed they were dealing with a well-oiled, financed organization with systematic plans on how to convert Jews.
This is where the investigation really transitioned from a religious scrutiny to a financial crime and security investigation.
Yeah.
They tracked the precise costs required to support these converts. And this was not cheap.
What were the specific financial commitments that defined this organization as a well-oiled machine?
Well, we've already mentioned the monthly stipend of 3,000 NIs a month, which is a significant operating expense just for basic living. But beyond that, they were paying for the full spectrum of assimilation.
Like what?
Renting apartments for the new converts, paying extensive lawyer fees to handle legal issues or disputes, and even securing exemptions from mandatory military service.
Securing military exemption, that's a massive operational commitment. It suggests high-level organizational competence and access to legal resources.
It is. This level of sustained, structured financial support is why the investigator finally concluded that this was not simply, as they put it, the falafel vendor who saw a girl and fell in love with her.
Right.
This was a systemic, budgeted operation dedicated to the acquisition and maintenance of Jewish converts.
And the financial trail eventually led to the inevitable question, where did the money come from? And that's where the political connections start to surface. When the investigator asked Sheikh Mercy directly about the source of the money, the response was immediately suspicious.
Mercy's answer was an almost textbook example of security evasion. For your sake, it is better that you do not know.
Wow.
That refusal to disclose the funding source, coupled with the sheer amount of money being instantly escalated the investigation's concerns regarding organized crime or, terrorism financing.
So the investigators immediately began to suspect the organization was connected to Hamas. They realized the immediate next phase had to be a comprehensive effort to follow the money.
And the activities on the ground certainly started aligning with Hamas' objective. The ultimate chilling confirmation came not from an accounting ledger, but from the converts' visible behavior.
Tell us about that. What was the visual confirmation that the training was?
The investigators observed a Jewish woman who was successfully converted through the center actively flying Hamas flags. A convert, yes. For the investigative team, this moment was defining. It wasn't just a religious change, it was a complete political transformation. They understood then that the entire ideological training process was complete. The center's output was not merely new Muslims. It was new ideological political soldiers aligned with a designated terror organization.
That single image, a Jewish convert flying the flag of a group dedicated to the destruction of Israel, is the perfect, horrifying synthesis of the Dar al-Salam mission.
To understand how the Dar al-Salam Center justified moving from, coexistence seminars to flying Hamas flags, we have a dive into the ideological blueprint that the investigation uncovered.
Right.
And at the core of this system is Dawa proselytization.
Dawah, in this context, is far more than simple missionary work.
Oh, much more. The source material defines it as a vital large-scale marketing tool for Islam, one aimed explicitly at achieving the universal domination of the faith. The center's ideology views it as a religious obligation that transcends personal choice.
The sources draw a contrast, stating that Judaism lacks this kind of sophisticated external marketing element. Can you elaborate on why Dawah is considered such a fundamental strategic?
In this ideological framework, the promotion and expansion of the faith is a constant, necessary obligation required for the ultimate success of Islam global. It's about establishing the supremacy of their divine law.
And the source material links this motivation directly to the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Exactly. An influential group whose ideology seems to have permeated the center strategy.
So if we look at the Muslim Brotherhood, how does their goal of imposing divine law translate into an operation like Dar al-Salam?
An intelligence expert cited in the investigation provided a crucial framework for this. They stated that the Muslim Brotherhood's ultimate goal is global dominion under their divine law. But, and this is key, they stressed that the military effort, the physical fighting, is only the tip of the iceberg.
And the vast majority of that iceberg is comprised of this soft power Dawah approach.
Precise. The primary effort is non-military. It focuses on infrastructure building and cultural infiltration, the efforts that go well because they look like simple charity or community involvement. The source material describes this method in detail, distributing essentials like diapers and meat in poor communities to build goodwill and dependence.
Okay.
Working through youth structures like dormitories and high schools, and establishing cells even within academic institutions.
Can you give a more detailed example of how this soft power translates into radicalizing the next generation? The source material mentioned that.
Sure. Consider the academic sphere.
Yeah.
The source material cites examples of Hamas student cells operating under the name Islamic Bloc. Their function is pure dawah. They organize social events, provide tutoring, offer financial assistance to needy students.
So they create a warm, supportive community environment.
Very similar to the Dar al-Salam initial appeal. But their ultimate purpose is ideological recruitment, subtly indoctrinating future leaders and isolating them from secular or opposing influences.
So the distribution of diapers and meat is not just charity. It's building a network of dependency and loyalty, which then becomes the platform for the ideological framework.
Exactly.
And this systematic approach sounds like it moves through distinct phases.
It does. The source material details an ideological framework for world conversion that operates across multiple, very clear stages. This is what the investigators called the 10 steps.
Okay, let's break down that framework. How do Dawah and Jihad relate across?
The framework is explicit about the sequence. The first 8 or 9 stages rely almost entirely on persuasion, dawah, on cultural work, building community infrastructure, and gradual Islamization. This is the period of soft power, where centers like Dar al-Salam operate. The goal is to maximize societal influence and conversion without armed conflict.
But the sources are clear that this persuasion phase is only a prelude.
It is the foundation. The source material emphasizes that the final stages, usually steps 9 or 10, require violence, or jihad. This is the critical transition point where the ideological groundwork laid by Dawah is weaponized for physical conflict.
And the investigators explicitly connect this framework to recent massive regional events.
They do. They cite the widespread violence during the 2021 clashes, known as the Guardians of the Walls, and critically, they cite the catastrophic October 7th attack.
And they don't see them as isolated criminal events.
No, they see them as systematic forms of jihad, the calculated application of violence required by the final stages of the ideological frame. The sources stress this violence is not an anomaly to the Muslim world, but a necessary phase within this strategic blueprint.
This means Sheikh Mercy's comment, connecting Dawah to a future of jihad, was not just an offhand remark, but a statement of systematic ideological strategy.
Absolutely. The investigator recounted Mercy's explicit statement that Dawah is the action being taken now because they cannot currently wage jihad. They lack the necessary strength or opportunity.
But he was certain that would change.
He expressed absolute certainty that in the future, in their children's time, they will be able to wage jihad. Dawah, therefore, is the vital work of preparing the ideological, demographic, and financial base. Jihad is the ultimate, inevitable culmination.
This strategic vision is anchored in a fundamental geopolitical division that explains the very name of the center, Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb.
This concept is central to the ideology, but was fiercely guarded by the center. The investigator took a significant risk by asking a sheikh at Dar al-Salam directly about the concepts of Dar al-Salam, the House of Peace, or Islam, versus Dar al-Harb, the House of War.
And the sheikh's reaction confirmed the secrecy surrounding the core doctrine.
The sources report the sheikh looked genuinely fearful, shocked, and immediately demanded to know who told the investigator that term. This demonstrated that while the public face was peace, The internal framework defining their mission was based on a philosophy of division and eventual conquest.
And it was something they actively called.
Very actively.
So let's define those two houses as the source material lays them out.
In this ideological worldview, Muslims divide all land geographically spanning as the source state, from Madagascar to Siberia, which unequivocally includes the State of Israel, into these two zones. Dar al-Islam is the territory where Islamic law is established and dominant.
And Dar al-Harb is everywhere else.
It's the territory where there are opponents of Islam and where Islamic law is not supreme.
And the existence of Dar al-Harb imposes a continuous mandate on us.
Yes. The mandate, according to the sources and this ideological framework, is utterly uncompromised.
Yeah.
All means are good and necessary to convert Dar al-Harb into Dar al.
And this is the crucial intellectual justification for the center's activities.
It is. The investigator used a truly shocking phrase to summarize the scale of this effort, saying the tools used range strategically from diapers to bullets.
The implication being that the soft dawah approach, the diapers and the community centers, is just as necessary and strategic a weapon in the long-term war as the bullets are in the short-term conflict.
Exactly. They are both tools on the same continuum, aimed at the same goal of establishing dominance. It explains the paradox. A center dedicated to peace has to be connected to radical network because ideologically, dawah and armed conflict are simply phases in the singular process of achieving the divine man.
Within this dawah phase, the source material identifies one major strategic objective specific to Dar al-Salam, the translation of the Quran.
This was highlighted as one of the most significant operational successes of the center. The rationale is purely strategic. The translation is essential so that the message of the Holy and Blessed Quran will reach every person easily and clearly.
It eliminates the linguistic and cultural barriers.
It eliminates the mediation that usually blocks the target demographic.
That makes the ideological marketing element incredibly potent. If they can make the central text directly accessible in the language of the target, they bypass decades of cultural and social filters.
It allows the center to control the narrative of true Islam directly, without relying on interpretation or outside source. It is the ultimate tool for mass proselytization during the dawah phase, preparing the target audience for the ideological shift that precedes the final stage.
To truly grasp the complexity of this operation, we need to map the leadership structure that was identified. This confirms that Dar al-Salam operated clear, established hierarchy.
Identifying these figures helps us understand the division of labor from ideological direction to logistical support and the critical function of networking with external extremists.
Let's start at the top. Sheikh Hassan was the founder of the center, though he is now the operational heart of the center, the one demanding instant conversion and enforcing financial secrecy, was Mercy Masar, known.
Mercy was the gatekeeper and the logistical manager, and his uncle, Dawood, handled the immediate assimilation need. Dawood was responsible for hosting the newly converted women and those initially interested in Islam, securing the immediate housing and social support that established dependence.
Echoing that 3,000 shekel stipend operation we talked about.
Precisely.
Now, let's look at the connections to the wider, more extreme ideological currents. The investigation singled out a man named Ramzi
Barboum is described as highly intelligent and cautious, which made him difficult to track. And crucially, he was in charge of computing at David Yellin College. His academic placement gave him both cover and access to potential student recruits.
So what was his specific role in the ideological network?
The sources identify Barboum as the essential bridge. He was the person connecting the Dar al-Salam Center, which largely operated within the Muslim Brotherhood dawah framework, with much more extreme Salafi groups operating out of Jerusalem. He was the one facilitating the movement toward the deeper, more radical edges of the ideological spectrum.
We also have Ammar al-Marbu, who focused on public relations and fundraising.
Yes, al-Marbu was primarily concerned with dawah activity and producing fundraising videos. This confirms the need for continuous external financial input to sustain those high operational costs we discussed, especially the stipends and legal fees. He was the center's face to international donors.
But perhaps the most powerful, heartbreaking figure identified in the investigation is Sheikh al-Din.
Sheikh al-Din was a dominant internal figure in the center and really the ultimate success story of their conversion. He was a former Jew named Oz who converted, married, and had children within the community.
And the investigator notes a surprising detail about. They never heard words of hatred or incitement from Sheikh al-Din
which makes him an even more potent tool for recruitment. He embodies the successful, peaceful assimilation into the new faith. But the human cost is brought into sharp focus by the source. His mother repeatedly calls the investigation team, crying and begging, "Save our Oz."
So his public success is his family's profound ongoing trauma.
That's it.
That story perfectly illustrates the dual reality. The external appearance is one of calm, non-inciting religious conviction, while the internal reality is one of complete familial and personal devastation.
And the center leverages that success. A converted Jew becoming a prominent, nonviolent figurehead. It just reinforces the idea that the conversion is natural, peaceful, and desirable, hiding the profound violence being done to the convert's original identity and family structure.
The final critical connection identified in the source material is the paradox surrounding Ala al-Din Medlal, a central act. This single figure seems to embody the compatibility between dawah and...
Medlal was crucial in the center's early years, focusing intensely on public dawah activity. He was seen at the Damascus Gate distributing the Quran in Hebrew directly to ultra-Orthodox Jews, promoting coexistence and cultural evenings.
He was the epitome of the House of Peace facade.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yet the source reveals his true allegiance was far darker. He was arrested for actively supporting Daesh, or ISIS. The investigator openly wrestled with this massive paradox. If he is Daesh, how is he distributing the Quran to ultra-Orthodox Jews?
And the investigation's realization here is the key takeaway for understanding the center's idea.
The conclusion was that dawah and radical extremism are not mutually exclusive. In this ideological framework, they are compatible and simultaneous parts of the same continuous process. The soft power dawah, the distributing of the Hebrew Quran, is the public accepted face that provides cover for the deep internal radicalization.
Which ultimately leads to the ISIS and Hamas links identified later.
Exactly.
And finally, the investigation showed that this wasn't just a localized problem in Kafkara, it had an international dimension.
It did. The sources noted a highly organized effort where a group of sheiks and activists from Dar al-Salam traveled across borders, specifically a trip to Nottingham, UK was mentioned, to stay at a local dawah center and conduct similar parallel activities, intentionally targeting Israelis living abroad.
Why is that international connection so important?
It provided crucial context. The investigator noted that Israelis often dismiss the threat of dawah efforts in Europe. They think they don't understand anything. Islam is conquering them, sort of minimizing the threat because it seems foreign.
Right.
Yet the investigation demonstrated the exact same systematic methods of psychological, financial, and ideological conversion were being employed locally in Israel. The danger was not just theoretical or foreign. It was an organized domestic application of a global strategy. So synthesizing these 5 sections, Dar al-Salam emerges based on the source material, not as a simple cultural exchange, but as a systematic, highly financed organization, possibly linked to groups like Hamas, utilizing psychological appeal and material support to systematically convert Jewish citizens. The material confirms that dawah, in this specific context, is not a benign spiritual pursuit, but is explicitly understood as the nonviolent prelude, the groundwork for potential violent jihad.
We have seen the immense personal trauma experienced by the families, that father wondering about his lost child, contrasting so starkly with the cold, high-level ideological objective of global dominance, where all land is categorized as either the house of peace or the house of war.
Right.
The center's success was measured by the complete and total dissolution of the convert's Jewish identity, replacing it with a new ideological certainty.
The investigation suggests a fundamental incompatibility between the center's public name, Dar al-Salam, and its ideological mandate.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to consider. If a center marketed itself as peace, yet its investigators noted that the process of training was complete only when they saw a convert flying the flag of a military. What is the ultimate ethical and societal cost when an organization that claims to promote coexistence defines its absolute long-term success as the elimination of the house of war, using its converts as ideological infantry in the process? That duality of peace used to mask preparation for conflict is something we leave with you to mull over. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the source material you trust us with, the investigative reports, the documents, all those complex files, and we try to extract the core. Today, we're digging deep into a really incredible file. It's a stack of investigative transcripts that just lay bare how an organization built this massive strategic structure right under the perfect guise of...
Right. And our mission today is really to analyze the operational blueprint that came out of this long-term investigation. And central to this whole thing is the absolutely dramatic account of the key informant, the person who exposed the whole system from the inside. He's a source known by this highly symbolic pseudonym, Ashraf Marwan.
Wow. I mean, that choice of name alone just signals the gravity, doesn't it? It's a reference to a major historical intelligence asset. So our objective here isn't just to track some illegal fundraising. It's really about dissecting the the dual nature of modern ideological conflict. We need to understand exactly how these massive resources, financial, human, intellectual, how they're actually deployed.
We're looking beyond the visible stuff, the rockets or the clashes, and we're diving into what the source material keeps calling heart training.
Dawa,
right. And its role in this long-term strategic conquest.
Precisely. And the material we have, it's a mix of receipts, transcripts, internal communications. It provides a functional blueprint, a blueprint of how dawa, or proselytizing organizations, operate when they are strategically aligned with terror. Our focus is on an organization called al-Salam, which is operating in and around Jerusalem. And the investigation links it directly to the Muslim Brotherhood and, its military offshoot, Hamas.
Okay.
So our mission is to understand the operational architecture, the financial plumbing, and the often shocking psychological methods they use to achieve these really long-term generational.
Let's set the stage for you, the listener, right away. Let's start with the central thesis of the investigator. What's the fundamental strategic relationship between this charity facade and the terror organization behind it? The source material is really explicit on it. This is a strategic split that defines their whole model, their longevity. According to the informant's understanding, Hamas allocates roughly 20% of its budget to military operations.
That's what we see in the headline.
That's the kinetic action, the rockets, the clashes, yes. But the overwhelming majority, 80%, is dedicated to social activities, to education, and to ideological out. In other words, to dawa.
80%.
That 80% is the real story. It's the long game.
That allocation just flips the script on how we typically view these groups, doesn't it? We tend to focus on that 20%. Our entire legal and security apparatus is tuned to detect that immediate kinetic threat. But this investigation is saying the real structural threat is in the...
Absolutely. The 80% provides the organizational stability, the ideological depth, and the resilience that they need to sustain the 20%. If we miss the strategic importance of that 80, the infrastructure of the heart, as they call it, then we fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the entire conflict.
So that's what we're going to unpack today, how that 80% gets deployed through an organization like Dar al-Salam.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this structural duality. For Dar al-Salam to function successfully for years, right in the middle of civil society, it had to project an image of, perfect altruism. What was the persona? What was the mask they presented to the community and, I guess, to the regulators?
Well, they presented themselves as the definition of community support. Their overt activities, they focus squarely on these tangible social services. Things like providing direct aid to people in need, distributing free religious books and pamphlets, usually aimed at vulnerable population, and running various educational classes that on the surface looked completely innocuous.
Like what? Language class?
Language classes, basic skills, religious studies. The whole point was to just blend into the social fabric, to make it almost unthinkable for anyone to question their motive.
And the source material highlights a really specific example that grounds this charitable guise in something, almost mundane, the laundromat, the makbah. Why choose something as simple as a laundromat front?
The genius of the laundromat, the makbah, is its necessity and its complete lack of glamour. It's boring. It was framed publicly as a humanitarian venture, providing affordable cleaning services or, in some tellings, even free services for the local poor.
It's just an essential community service.
It is. It requires a physical building, utilities, employees. You have to interact with the local government for permits. It sounds utterly innocent.
Necessary.
Even kind. It's the perfect cover for a structure that was built with completely illicit funds.
But the investigation, which was obviously fueled by the informant's incredible risk, revealed that this seemingly altruistic laundromat was in fact built using terror funds. We need to trace that paper trail. How did funds from a designated terror group end up turning into spinning washing?
The documents were the smoking gun. According to the receipts and the transfers that were uncovered, the laundromat was financed directly by the broader Muslim Brotherhood network. Specifically, it was funneled through the Hamas Charity Coalition, which is a recognized terror funding.
But the money wouldn't have come directly, of course. That would just trigger immediate red flags.
No, absolutely not.
So let's define the local mechanism, the conduit that cleaned the money enough to pay for, bricks and mortar. What was the organization sitting between the global terror financing network and this local building project?
That role was played by Lajna Zakat al-Quds al-Markazia.
Okay, what is that?
It's the Central Zakat Committee of Jerusalem. And for you, the listener, you should think of this as the organization with the clean name and the dirty money. It sounds like a normal local religious donation committee. But the investigator got his hands on critical, irrefutable documentation, actual receipts, confirming that this entity was the funding source for the construction of the laundry.
And these receipts weren't just, buried in some file cabinet somewhere. They were addressed directly to the local leader.
Precisely. They were addressed directly to Sheikh Morsi, who was the director of Dar al-Salam. And this established a hard documentary link between Morsi's organization, the charity Facade, and Lajna Zakat al-Quwad, which was known to be a functional front for designated terror finance.
So the paper trail proved it. A critical piece of local charitable infrastructure was directly financed by a terror funding conduit.
Yes.
That evidence is seismic. It's huge because it links the local operation, the Makbasa, directly to the global strategy. So let's expand on the strategic significance of this funding structure. It sounds like this money flow isn't just transactional, it's ideological.
It is entirely ideological. Let's go back to the sources analysis of that Hamas budget split. 20% for kinetic action, 80% for social activity, for dawah. This 80% is the critical lifeblood that ensures the long game's success. And this vast pool of funding is directed to local organizations like Dar al-Salam, but only after they have been thoroughly vetted and have demonstrated alignment with Hamas's overall ideological and strategic goals.
So how does that funding mechanism actually ensure compliance? Does the money just come with strings attached that force the recipient to stick to the political line?
The control is structural. By providing the lion's share of the operational budget for salaries, for rent, for maintenance, and for capital projects like the laundromat, Hamas ensures that the local institution's very existence is dependent on its pay.
So if Dar al-Salam stops towing the ideological line,
the 80% dries up. It's that simple. And this creates a clear hierarchical structure, what the investigator called the pyramid model, even though it appears totally decentralized at street level. Every employee, every volunteer is indirectly serving the strategic goals of Hamas because they rely on that cash.
You used this really powerful analogy before of the cake and the cherry. Let's just make sure the listener fully gets that.
The analogy presented by the investigator is that the social work, that 80% funding, is the flour, yeast, and cocoa. It provides the nutritional and structural foundation. It's the whole cake. The ultimate military action, the 20%, is merely the cherry on top.
Right. And the world focuses entirely on the cherry.
Of course, the spectacular, immediate violence. But you can't have the cherry without the stability of the cake. So if Dar al-Salam is operational and ideologically sound because of this structure, then every book distributed, every class taught, every laundromat opened is fundamentally serving that overarching 20-year ideological objective.
It's a system designed for resilience, hiding its strategic purpose in plain sight behind human acts.
Exactly. And the sheer scale of the 80% ensures that the local workers maintain their ideological loyalty or they lose their livelihood.
It's an incredibly effective...
It is. It turns charity into a tool of strategic governance and ideology all at the local.
Okay, so now let's trace the network backward. We know Lajna Zakat al-Quds is the local conduit, but the sheer volume of money required to sustain that 80% budget must be coming from somewhere massive. Let's talk about the global money trail, because this is where the complexity and, frankly, the criminal scale of it becomes really apparent.
Right. So Lajna Zakat al-Quds al-Markaziyya, that central funding body, it sits at the nexus of a truly complex global financial infrastructure. The investigation revealed that it is substantially funded by a constellation of Muslim Brotherhood terror organizations that are operating all across the globe.
Which specific organizations were identified as feeding into?
The source material specifically named the Hamas Charity Coalition, that's the parent organ, along with other groups operating internationally. For example, Muslim Hands and Human Appeal. This flow of money is designed to move across multiple jurisdictions. It passes through various legal and seemingly legitimate international charities before it finally filters down to that local zakat.
This layering, it sounds like textbook money laundering. It's designed explicitly to obscure the origins of the funds to make sure that by the time the money hits Jerusalem, it just looks like a clean, untainted donor.
That is precisely the point. We're looking at accumulated significant criminal offenses that span multiple jurisdictions. The sheer logistical infrastructure required to sustain the flow of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars annually to support this 80% dawah budget is enormous.
So they need multiple vectors, multiple layers.
Exactly, to ensure a continuous flow, making it nearly impossible for any single national regulator to shut down the source. The money has to look clean enough to pay for construction materials and local salaries without triggering bank closure.
Let's pivot from the global mechanism to the local transaction. How did the money move from Lajna Zakat al-Quds into the hands of Dar al-Salam for just day-to-day operational cash, beyond the big-ticket items like the laundromat?
The director of Dar al-Salam, Sheikh Morsi, was the key local player here. The informant, who was very close to Morsi, described accompanying him on these regular trips. Morsi would travel monthly to Jerusalem, specifically to the offices of Lajna Zakat al-Quwad. There, he would meet with key operatives from the Zakat Committee. They're named in the source material as Hamza Kaisi and Ashraf Sahab.
And what was the nature of that transaction? I'm assuming it wasn't a clean, traceable wire transfer?
Far from it. The transaction was described as Morsi receiving a stack of Jordanian dinars from Case, a physical handover of cash. This wasn't a bank transfer for several crucial reasons. Cash is immediate. It's untraceable once it leaves the office. And it allows the local operation to avoid relying on banks that might suddenly flag large transfers from the Zakat committee.
So this physical cash injection was necessary for salaries, funding the educational classes, printing pamphlets.
The entire infrastructure of Dawa was built on stacks of untraceable Jordanian dinar.
And that logistical detail immediately raises the stakes for our informant, Ashraf Marwan, who was likely witnessing these illicit cash handovers first.
Absolutely. We have to remember that the informant was collecting this detail while he was embedded. He was often sitting in the room while these significant criminal transactions took place. His understanding of the organization's logistics, its reliance on cash, and its key personnel was foundational to the entire investigation. Every single witnessed handover just increased his personal risk exponentially.
Okay, so beyond the general operational funding, the investigation revealed a powerful system of specific performance-based incentives, and this transformed the money from mere maintenance into a tactical reward.
This is where the organization really starts to treat ideological penetration like a measurable business strategy. The financial support structure included a direct tactical reward. Money was paid per head for every successful convert to Islam.
Per head. That's not charity. It's a recruitment.
Right.
It makes the highly sensitive psychological process of dawah sound like a quarterly sales quota for a product.
It is treated as a strategic metric with a financial valuation. And furthermore, the money was allocated not just for the recruitment bonus, but for the entire ideological immersion process.
Mm-hmm.
There were significant funds dedicated to providing free studies for converts to ensure they were thoroughly indoctrinated.
And they were investing in infrastructure, too.
Critically, yes. The organization invested hundreds of thousands of dollars specifically aimed at establishing a dedicated news center in Jerusalem. This shows a long-term capital investment in the Dawa infrastructure itself, right in the strategically vital heart of the conflict.
This just confirms the shift from simply maintaining the organization to strategically investing in ideological results. I mean, if they are paying per head, what kind of return on investment, what kind of ROI are they expecting from these high-value contracts?
That is the essential question that connects the financing to the ideology. When you offer a bonus per conversion, you are treating that person as an asset acquisition. The expected return is immense and multifaceted. It's not just about numbers. It's about loyalty, intelligence potential, and crucially, generational impact. As we'll explore, the conversion of a person with specialized knowledge, or simply one who will raise a new generation in the organization's ideology, is considered a strategic win that's equivalent to a military victory.
So the money just confirms it. They see dawah as high-stakes strategic warfare.
Exactly. And the ROI is measured in ideological penetration and future operational capability. The financial metric is the clearest indicator of their true priority.
So given that 80% of the budget is dedicated to dawah and that the funding is performance-based, measured by conversion, then the organization's primary focus can't just be distributing aid. The source confirms they do genuinely helpful things, distributing holiday meat or running anti-drug programs, but what is the real priority beneath that cover?
The material is unambiguous. Dawah, which is defined as the mission for the total imposition of Allah's law globally, consumes the largest percentage of time, intellectual effort, and financial investment. The typical humanitarian activities like distributing diapers or running soccer leagues, those are the necessary cover. That's the flour we discussed before. These smaller acts of charity are the mechanism that ensures vulnerable individuals and families stay within the orbit of the institution long enough to receive the concentrated ideological message.
The ultimate aim is described as total Islamization, the conquering of the land and the heart. This suggests a deeply sophisticated communication strategy, far beyond just crude recruitment tactics.
It's highly advanced. It's almost corporate in its execution. The investigator drew a really striking parallel to global marketing strategy. Think of Coca-Cola. The product is always the same, but the packaging and messaging are meticulously custom. They compared it to Coke, adjusting its marketing in a highly secular area versus a highly devout religious neighbor. The ultimate product Islamization is the same, but the pathway to consumption is tailored to attract the specific psychological profile of the target audience.
So they're using customized psychological profiling to identify and exploit specific vulnerability. How did the leaders of Dar al-Salam, people like Sheikh Morsi, gain the specialized knowledge tailored?
They invested deeply in intelligence gathering and preparation. The Dawa operation was structured like an intelligence wing. Morsi and his core team, they studied Judaism, Israeli culture, and employed specific psychological profiling techniques. For a secular, Western-educated individual, the messaging might present Islam as the religion of forgiveness and peace, focusing on personal structure and calm.
But for someone from a more religious background?
For someone from a religious background, the emphasis might be on theological superiority or historical profit. This isn't casual proselytizing. It's an intelligence operation focused on identifying and leveraging psychological vulnerabilities to maximize conversion.
And who was the target audience for this customized approach? The source material details some remarkably diverse and specifics. It suggests a very wide and intentional net.
The net was wide, but the targeting was sharp. They focused on students in reputable religious university group, which is a key demographic for future leadership. They targeted secular individuals seeking structure, and surprisingly, those from the religious nationalist stream. They also had a specific focus on members of the Breslov Hasidic movement, who were often characterized by spiritual seeking and, well, enthusiasm.
And the most stunning example of this high-value target.
Crucially, they focused heavily on women, specifically female veterans of the IDF's elite 8200 intelligence unit.
Wow.
This targeting reveals an astonishing level of strategic planning. They understood the value of deep organizational and operational knowledge. Even if these women had left the service, their insights into the opponent's mindset, structure, and technological capabilities would be immensely valuable.
So the goal then is a complete transformation, a total systemized process where success isn't confirmed until the convert is completely immersed and visually compliant.
That's right. The proof of success for the funding organization wasn't just a verbal agreement or attending a class. It was a visible, complete ideological and behavioral transformation. The evidence of success was the convert adopting the niqab or hijab. This outward display of submission is the ultimate confirmation to the funding body and proof to the Dawa operatives that the ideological process is complete and the financial investment has yielded the expected result.
Let's return to that staggering equivalence we discussed earlier. The investigation found that conversion is treated as a strategic military success.
The investigators' findings on this are chillingly direct. The conversion of a Jewish soldier or a person from a high-value background is viewed by these organizations as an act that is no less heroic, considered, or valued than dispatching a suicide bomber.
We have to pause and unpack that equivalent. Why would a slow, patient ideological conversion equal to, or maybe even superior, short-term kinetic attack?
Because it addresses the core strategic need, longevity and internal erosion. A suicide bomber provides a brief, intense kinetic victory. It's shock, terror, and media attention. Its ROI is immediate but short-lived.
Right.
A successful convert, particularly one with deep ties to the opposing side's institutions, provides a sustained, long-term ideological victory. They become a permanent ideological wedge, a source of potential intelligence, and the progenitor of future generations who are ideologically aligned with the organization.
So this convert is essentially a perpetual weapon that self-replicates.
And it erodes the societal fabric from within for 20 years. That realization is why Dawa gets the 80% budget allocation. It's an investment in sustainable generational conflict.
It transforms the field of conflict from the battlefield to the nursery.
Exactly. And the financial structure rewards this long-term vision. They are buying the future, not just the next headline.
And while the recruiters initially frame the Dawa process in terms of peace and personal structure, the source material offers a devastating, gut-wrenching look at the long-term personal toll on these high values.
The initial phase is pure psychological catering. New converts initially describe feeling calmer, more settled, and happy. They're often fleeing feelings of alienation or searching for meaning, and the organization greets them with incredible love, support, and structure.
But the source material shows that promise of peace quickly devolves into a very different reality once the person is fully committed and isolated.
Yes. The investigator described encountering women who later returned, sometimes years later, having fled the environment. They came back as broken, pitiful mothers of children, abused women, fleeing intense physical and psychological violence. These were often women who had been successful, independent, and highly educated prior to their conversion. The contrast was so stark, so devastating, that the investigator described posing a profoundly relevant question.
What was the question?
How did you turn from a queen into a slave?
That question just underscores the tragedy. The initial psychological tailoring is a perfect trap. The convert exchanges freedom and their previous identity for isolation and subjugation, all to serve the organizational structure that funded the process.
It's the ultimate strategic betrayal. They are promised peace and stability, but once their ideological transformation is complete, they are assets whose personal well-being is completely secondary to the movement's strategic requirement. The system is designed to acquire the heart, isolate the individual, and then subject them to the harsh realities of the controlling ideology. So if we connect this strategy to the larger picture, the operational success of Dar al-Salam really hinged on its ability to penetrate and utilize legitimate structures within civil society. And this raises the critical question of systemic failure. How deeply did this Dawa ideology penetrate civil society, and what was the failure of established institutions to address it?
This source material offers a particularly alarming anecdote concerning the education.
This is perhaps the most critical structural vulnerability that the investigation identified. The Ministry of Education, in an effort to promote tolerance and coexistence, allegedly supported programs framed as benign intercultural encounters, or devacquium.
So school trips.
Organized for high school students grades 10 through 12 who were taken to mosques directly associated with these radical Dawa groups like Dar al-Salam in Kafkara or the Central Mosque in al-Fam.
And the students were put in a situation where they were implicitly expected to respect the religious protocols of the host organization?
Yes, they were instructed to follow mosque etiquette, removing their shoes and observing the protocols expected within the religious space. The outward framing was purely education. However, the investigator managed to access internal documents, specifically reports being sent to Turkish and Jordanian donors, that spelled out the true, non-public objective of these visits.
And the true objective was far from intercultural tolerance, I guess.
It was ideological conquest. The explicit goal documented in those internal reports was twofold: either to convert the students to Islam outright, or at a minimum, to reduce their ideological resistance to Islam.
So the state-sanctioned education system was unintentionally used as a vector for entry?
Precisely. It allowed a radical group, funded by terror money, direct psychological access to minors.
This shows the 80% Dawa budget at its most patient and efficient. You invest time, not money, to slowly transform a population mindset. And the investigation details the ultimate trajectory of this specific fail.
Yes, the source details the anecdote of a specific girl who visited Dar al-Salam with her high school class as part of this devacquium program. Years later, she was located wearing the niqab and gloves in East Jerusalem, having married a Hamas operative.
Wow.
This is the intended consequence made terrifyingly real. A transformation from an unsuspecting high school student whose skepticism was intentionally reduced by a state-sponsored trip into an ideologically loyal asset, marrying directly into the terror infrastructure.
Let's tie this organizational mechanism to the larger strategic conflict. The investigator argues that this entire Dawa apparatus is a ticking time bomb.
The argument is that the infrastructure built by the 80% budget, the mosque, the converts, the ideological loyalty, was integral to the planning of massive multi-front conflict. The greater plan allegedly included the eventual execution of a 7 October scenario, combined with internal operations aimed at the conquest of the Galilee and local insurrection, like the Guardian of the Walls incidents that occurred previously.
So the Dawa infrastructure provides the ideologically loyal personnel, safe houses,
the financial everything necessary to fuel this internal conflict when the external.
And there's an explicit example of a Dawa asset being immediately pivoted into a kinetic asset during times of civil unrest.
Yes. The material notes an operative who was closely tied to the organization, his 2 sons had traveled to Turkey for instruction, who is specifically meant to execute Guardian of the Wall's actions in his Jerusalem district. And, critically, he was meant to do this using money provided directly by the Dawa organization. This shows the seamless integration. The Dawa apparatus provides the ideological loyalty and the funding, which can be instantly activated and pivoted toward military or civil violence when the time is right.
And this leads to the foundational ideological principle that the investigator underscores. Jihad will never come.
This is the absolute, non-negotiable core of the ideology they are dealing with. There is no religious or legal permission for jihad to originate from agreement, compromise, or coexist. The only resolution, from their ideological perspective, is the absolute, crushing, decisive defeat of the opposition.
So the focus on Dawa is a pragmatic pathway to that victory.
It is. If you conquer the hearts of the opposition's youth, you ensure their eventual surrender without needing a massive military campaign.
The source material also provides painful, contemporary evidence that Dawa isn't a separate, softer branch of it, but an integrated component of the armed struggle, even at the tactical level.
This is a truly dark detail. Even military captives taken by force during conflict, such as the October 7 incident, were subjected to attempted Islamization by their captors. The source confirms that these captors were members of the military arm, holding the hostages in the tunnel. They attempted to impose Islamic principles and push conversion onto the victims.
So it demonstrates that Dawa is a universal and constant.
It's pursued relentlessly, even in the most extreme conditions of armed conflict. It's a total war concept that recognizes no separation between the psychological battlefield and the physical one.
Given the scale, the financial backing, and the 20-year timeline of this ideological operation, the investigator offers a scathing critique of how traditional legal systems have just utterly failed to address.
The critique centers on a fundamental mismatch of tools. The traditional legal framework, criminal law, is completely ill-equipped to combat an ideological war. The investigator described police officers patrolling the area and being completely duped by the vacuum store. They would patrol and even photograph with our al-Salam leaders, believing they were dealing with a genuine, if perhaps zealous, charitable organization.
They were fighting a ghost in the machine. They were looking for armed men while the real threat was in the classroom.
Exactly. The investigator calls the reliance on criminal law ineffective. He uses this powerful military analogy to explain the mismatch. Fighting dawa with criminal law tools, which require the immediate proof of means and intent, is like asking a tank driver in the Yom Kippur War to secure detailed evidentiary cross-verification before firing on an enemy T-55 tank.
So the system is designed to prosecute short-term crimes. A bank robbery, a murder.
Which require quick evidence. But here the system is facing a 2-decade-long process of patient mass radicalization.
So the timeline of radicalization is just exponentially longer than the timeline of creating a mass blind spot.
The enemy operates on a 20-year timeline, ensuring that their intentions are masked by layers of charity and education. The legal challenge is insurmountable. How do you prove the specific intent for jihad 20 years down the line, using rules of evidence designed for a petty theft today? The system is simply not built to identify or disrupt a patient, highly resourced strategic campaign masked by charitable paperwork and community engagement. This blind spot is the single greatest enabler of the 80% dawah strategy.
The structural analysis shows the threat, but the human cost and the investigation's success really hinged on the informant, Ashraf Marwan. We've mentioned the risk he took by simply witness cash handover. Let's trace how that risk culminated in the dramatic climax of this investigation.
The investigator was deeply aware of the risk throughout the entire operation. The meticulous work of gathering receipts and internal transcripts was incredibly slow, and the danger was constant. The informant was embedded within a hostile, highly structured ideological organization. The investigation really stalled until a critical turning point involving a foreign trip.
In January 2021, a trip to Turkey became the unexpected catalyst. What was the purpose of this trip, and how did the investigator monitor it?
A group from Dar al-Salam traveled to Turkey for a course. The objective, based on initial surveillance, was unclear, perhaps further ideological training or tactical instruction. The investigator, relying on open-source intelligence and monitoring the operative social media, tried desperately to decipher the purpose of this international movement and determine who they were meeting. The anxiety surrounding this trip was immense. Turkey is a high-risk operational zone where the rules can change rapidly.
And shortly after the group returned from this highly secretive international course, the entire investigation pivots dramatically with the communication.
Yes. A short time later, the investigator received a completely unexpected email. It was simple, terse, and it was signed with the pseudonym Ashraf Marwan. This moment was the absolute climax of years of dangerous, patient work. The theoretical investigation instantly became a real, immediate life-or-death situation.
That realization must have just hit the investigator like a shockwave. After all that anonymous intelligence gathering, the source had revealed themselves and their critical importance.
Realization was profound. Suddenly, the investigator knew the identity and the operational significance of the person standing opposite them. The dizzying complexity of the financial flows, the connections between Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, and international funding, it all suddenly crystallized around a single, now incredibly vulnerable asset.
But I imagine that confirmation, that validation of years of work must have been immediately mixed with profound fear, especially given the context of that Turkey. Was the source revealing themselves because they were fleeing or because they had been compromised?
That suspicion was crippling. Was the source genuine? Or had the source been identified and flipped recruited by Turkish intelligence, or perhaps forced by the terror organization itself to request a meeting as a setup?
It could easily have been an assassination attempt.
Absolutely. Orchestrated by the very organization the investigator was targeting. The danger wasn't just to the informant, but to the entire investigation and the investigator's personal safety.
And the suspicion was immediately confirmed, or at least alleviated, by the sheer panic conveyed in the first actual phone call.
The first phone call was chaotic, breathless, and utterly desperate. It wasn't a measured conversation. The source was running in panic. The words were simple and terrifying. "They're chasing me. I ran away from there. Now I feel I'm reaching the end."
Wow. So that confirms the immediate flight, the overwhelming fear, and the absolute necessity of an immediate extraction before the organized capture silence. What was the investigator's immediate tactical response to that threat?
The investigator realized that the source was on the brink of collapse and potentially compromised by fear and exhaustion. The immediate priority was psychological stabilization. The investigator immediately confirmed that they were en route to the designated extraction, telling the source in a firm but calm voice to breathe. to calm down and try to organize the critical information they had risked everything.
And that phone call set the final dramatic.
It did. It set the stage for the extraction and the subsequent handover of all the essential receipts, names, and operational details that form the entire basis of this. The theoretical structure of terror financing had culminated in a very real, immediate life-or-death moment for Ashraf, #tag.
This has been a deeply detailed and frankly unsettling analysis into the operational mechanics of Dar al-Salam and the overarching Dawa strategy. We've peeled back the layer. The strategic use of charity to hide illegal funding, the vast global funding network tracing back to designated terror organs, the systematic, high-value targeting and customized psychological profiling of vulnerable populations, and the ultimate goal, the goal of ideological conquest, Dawa, being treated as strategically equivalent to or even more valuable than military action or jihad.
What stands out here above all else is the patience and the long-term vision of these organizations. They are not beholden to quarterly budgets or election cycles. They operate on a 20-year timeline, recognizing that conquering hearts and generating ideological loyalty within the next generation is the only sustainable pathway to future territorial and political conquest.
They saw the 80% Dawa budget as their path to victory.
They did.
And if Dawa, or heart training, consumes that 80% budget and is considered by hostile actors to be equal to or even more important than a missile attack, the cake over the cherry, then the greatest strategic failure, as the investigator so clearly articulated, is the institutional refusal to recognize that this is not common crime. It is a sustained, highly sophisticated, ideological war.
And when institutional defense systems, local police, regulators, government ministries, when they treat the Dawa apparatus as merely a regulatory challenge, worrying about zoning permits for the laundromat, perhaps, rather than a sustained strategic threat operating on a 20-year timeline, they are fundamentally enabling the very process they are mandated to stop.
The focus has to shift.
It has to fundamentally shift from prosecuting short-term criminal intent to disrupting long-term structural ideological penetration.
So what does this all mean? If these actors prioritize ideological warfare and they utilize the society that we trust, charity service, to achieve their goal, what fundamental shift must occur in tech society and the next generation from this quiet, devastating war? That's the strategic question that remains long after filed. We have a stack of sources that are really, really intense. We're looking at transcripts of interviews, real-time communications, and they detail this psychological and physical journey that, honestly, it feels more like an espionage thriller than a spiritual search.
It really does.
Yeah.
That's a perfect way to put it. The whole premise here is just startlingly complex. We're examining the experiences of Jewish converts who, not only embraced Islam, but became incredibly embedded within these highly active and on the surface very peaceful Islamic proselytizing organizations.
Right, and the sources, it's mostly testimony from a man we're going to call Oz and another woman named Saviana. They really pull back the curtain. They show us the brutal truth of what happens when that peaceful facade just completely shatters. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to go beyond just the surface level drama. We want to extract the key mechanisms of, ideological deception. Look at the surprising turning points that can just shatter deeply held beliefs. And then the truly harrowing process of escaping a highly controlled environment.
And we're centering the whole discussion on one specific organization, a center called Dar al-Salam, which is located in Kafkara.
Dar al-Salam. Got it.
And the deep dive really focuses on Oz. He was a very highly placed figure inside that organization. He first made contact with the people documenting his story way back in 2019. He was using a pseudonym at the time, Ashraf Marwan.
Ashraf Marwan. Okay, so right from the start, there's this layer of secrecy.
Oh, absolutely. The complexities there from day one. He was navigating this profound, very high-stakes dual existence for years. He was living two lives.
And the timeline here is so critical, isn't it? It connects this deeply personal story to these major geopolitical events that everyone will recognize. So the contact was in 2019, but the sources say the real crisis, the thing that, accelerated his need to escape, that all escalated dramatically around the time of the October 7th conflict.
It did. And the sources also point to earlier periods of tension. They use these very specific phrases, like the conquest of the Galilee and guardian of the walls.
So for you listening, if you're trying to place this, these are terms that refer to periods of, intense localized conflict. It means we're tracking a story that was already under pressure and then it exploded into this high-stakes terrorist.
Exactly. That political context is the fire under the pressure cooker.
Yeah.
It's what makes the contrast so dramatic. You have Oz, who spent a little more than 5 years as this deeply respected, institutionalized figure within Dar al-Salam. He reached the status of a spiritual leader.
5 years is a long time.
It's an eternity in that kind of environment. The sheer commitment it takes to maintain that kind of role for half a decade is just staggering. And then to have it all culminate in this one stark realization. And he says it himself, I really, truly want to go back to Judah.
Wow. It just sets up this immediate tension that we have to explore for you. How does a person go from being the poster child, the exemplary success story of an organization?
Their best case study.
Right, to actively risking his life to expose its extremist core. I think we need to start by looking at just how high he climbed before that hit.
That's the perfect place to start, because when we talk about these kinds of ideological mechanisms, the level of integration required for a person to reach the status of ideal convert, as the sources call him, it means they are strategically valuable. We really have to analyze why the organization invested so much in him and what infrastructure he helped them build.
Okay, so let's get into that. When we dive into these sources detailing Oz's life at Dar al-Salam in Kafkara, we have to start by, I think, appreciating the depth of his integration. This wasn't some, casual spiritual exploration.
No, not at all. He was the definition of an organizational success story. The sources literally called him the ideal convert model.
An ideal convert model. So why? Why was he so perfect?
Well, his value was exponential. First, there's a time commitment. Oz was embedded for a significant period over 5 years. That alone signifies a huge level of trust and, deep personal investment from his side.
Sure.
But it goes way beyond time. The organization made sure he was completely integrated into the cultural and really the family structure of the community. He married a Muslim woman.
Okay.
And he had 3 or 4 children with her. That biological and familial anchoring. That is the ultimate binding age. When you have kids, the stakes of leaving, they just transform. It's no longer about your own personal spiritual discomfort.
It's about fragmenting a family.
Exactly. It's the physical and social fragmentation of an entire family unit. It's almost an impossible choice.
And it wasn't just that he was personally embedded. He achieved, serious institutional status within the center. He didn't just learn, he was teaching.
He rose to become a sheikh. He was actively leading dawah classes himself.
A sheikh. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh?
So for the organization, he wasn't just a testimonial you could put on a brochure. He was a machine.
A machine.
The sources use this wonderfully vivid metaphor for him. They call him a chicken laying golden eggs.
A chicken laying golden eggs. Let's unpack that metaphor.
Well, if you think about it, it means he was an asset that produced continuous high-value return. And what were those returns? Credibility and effectiveness. Imagine a native-born Jewish person, fluent in Hebrew, who understands all the nuances of Jewish culture and spirituality.
Right.
Who not only converts, but then achieves clerical status. I mean, that is an unparalleled tool for proselytization, for dawah.
The moment he starts preaching, it just validates everything the organization claims to be about, their peaceful, universal out. It lets them bypass all the natural skepticism of their target audience. Other Jews who might otherwise, dismiss the message as foreign or politically motivated.
He was the ultimate proof of concept.
And this whole propagation mechanism, it relied on a very specific and pretty sophisticated tool. The sources highlight the organization's immense pride in their Hebrew translation of the Holy Quran.
They called it the Dar translation. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a translation. It was specifically engineered as a tool for missionites. It presented the text in a way that was designed to resonate with the linguistic and cultural background of a native Hebrew speaker.
That attention to detail, It really speaks volumes about how targeted their dawah was. They knew the message had to be, culturally frictionless.
Precisely. And Oz, as the fluent Hebrew speaker, the one who truly understood the cultural landscape, he became the perfect messenger for this specific tool. He was the one taking the Dar translation and using it to actively call people to Islam.
He was the delivery system.
He was. And he even admitted his role during this time. He states it explicitly in the source material. He says, I currently am a missionary. I roam among Muslims, calling people to Islam.
That's a direct confession.
It is, and it's critical. It shows he wasn't just passively accepting a belief, he was actively disseminating. And that level of public commitment is what created this profound internal schism for him.
Right, you mentioned that schism, the dual life he was leading. Because for a long while, he genuinely believed in it, right?
Oh, absolutely. He says, I believed in it at first. I truly believed in it. But as he rose in status, he was forced to try and reconcile his initial, maybe more moderate, spiritual vision with the hardline political extremism he was starting to see within the organization.
And sustaining that intense public role while you're secretly nursing doubts. And then eventually becoming, completely disillusioned by the extremism, that must have been an incredible strain.
A deeply demanding dual existence. He was trying to hold on to what he described as true Islam, a moderate spiritual interpretation that's focused on peace and devotion. But all the while, the organization was using his public face to push a radical, anti-Semitic political agenda. The dissonance must have been deafening.
I have to ask, if he was that vital to them, that much of a golden egg, didn't the organization have, I don't know, contingencies, ways to monitor him or ensure his loyalty? After 5 years of that kind of investment, you'd think they would notice any deviation.
They absolutely would have, which just makes his predicament so much more dangerous. The marriage, the children, his status as a sheikh, these aren't just social perks, they're security measures.
They're anchored.
They are. There are ties that bind him to the organization's geography and its loyalty structure. But what the source material shows is that, the human spirit ultimately rebels against total ideological capture.
And his inner conflict, it's just laid bare in the source material through this one powerful, very telling statement. Something he said only when he thought no one was listening. He confesses his deepest truth. He said, "A Jew remains."
And that phrase, after 5 years of total cultural, marital, and spiritual immersion, it's just incredibly potent. It shows that his original identity, his connection to his Jewish roots, it was never fully erased. It was just suppressed.
It was the bedrock.
It was the bedrock he secretly returned to. The identity that gave him the strength to eventually challenge the very organization that was giving him his status, his family, his whole life.
It makes his eventual turn so much more shocking to them. He wasn't some peripheral figure they could just dismiss. He was their crown jewel. So when the model breaks, it's not because of some weakness in the convert's faith. It's because the organization's true nature became so vile that it overwhelmed the initial draw.
And living that contradiction, that internal turmoil, it could only last for so long. Something external had to happen to provide undeniable proof that his internal defense, that he was practicing true Islam, was a fantasy.
Right. And now we have to move to where that proof was delivered, which, as it turns out, was far from Kafkara.
A long way from home.
So this moment of absolute clarity for Oz, what he and the sources describe as the dropping of the coin, it didn't happen in a local class. It happened abroad at a high-level course held in Istanbul. Why?
The location itself is a huge red flag. Istanbul was strategically chosen for a very specific. It provided a freer environment for this kind of ideological instruction.
Freer how?
Well, within Israel, these centers have to maintain a public facade of moderation. They're under scrutiny from the Shin Bet, from the police, from general public opinion. But outside the country, the organizers felt, unconstrained. They could bring in key international ideological figures, activists who were either banned from entering Israel because of their views,
or who just preferred to operate where they felt less watched.
Exactly. Less constrained by Western or Israeli legal oversight. So the environment itself was a signal that this instruction was going to be raw, unfiltered extremism.
And the sources detailed the explicit goal of that course. It was designed entirely to organize Dawa activists, people like Ah, to practice Islamic missionary work, specifically targeting Jews.
And this wasn't just some abstract goal. They had a concrete plan. The sources mentioned they were planning to establish a new Dar al-Salam center right near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
Wow.
So this shows the mission wasn't just about conversion. It was deeply political and geographically focused on achieving ideological dominance in one of the most sensitive, contested locations in the entire world.
So this course was the true ideological core of the organization, and it was being delivered to its most trusted operative. When Oz attended, he was getting the highest level of instruction, the ultimate truth behind the facade. The contradiction between the stated mission of coexistence and the actual content must have been impossible.
It was.
Yeah.
Let's look at the specific figures Oz heard lecturing, because their identities and their rhetoric, this is a hard evidence that just shattered his 5 years of commitment. We can start with Lauren Booth.
Lauren Booth. The source describes her as a highly controversial figure, lists her as one of the world's leading anti-Semites. Oz had apparently seen her before at these highly charged political events, including Hezbollah support routes.
Holding signs that read "Death to Israel."
Right.
And what's crucial about Booth is that she herself is a Western convert. Her presence lends this false veneer of global legitimacy and appeal to the movement. The message is, if a Western personality is embracing this ideology, then surely it must be legitimate.
It's a marketing tool.
A very effective one. And the sources claim she allegedly received a VIP passport directly from Ismail Haniyeh, a senior leader of Hamas.
So that's not just a casual link.
No. That level of proximity to a declared terrorist organization is not a coincidence. It's a clear statement of ideological alignment. For Oz, who had committed himself to what he thought was a spiritual path, seeing this connection confirmed the political and violent undercurrent he had been suspecting.
But the instruction, it got even more specific and more chilling. Next on the list of lecturers was Sheikh Izz al-Din. What did he instruct the activists?
Sheikh Izz al-Din's advice was chillingly specific and actionable. It was directed towards the Jewish population who might be listening to or receiving their dawah efforts. His instruction was direct. He said, find your French or Polish or Dutch passport and try to leave before people come to expel you.
That's extraordinary. That is not theology. That's an explicit, proactive political call. It's bordering on a genocidal call. It suggests the future political goal isn't conversion, it's outright ethnic cleansing.
It does. And that those who convert or listen to the dawah are just instruments for that larger goal.
Right.
When a spiritual leader tells your target audience to preemptively flee before they are forcibly removed, it's a clear articulation of intent. It means the dawah effort was never really about saving souls. It was about preparing the ground for political action. It was about making sure that Jews either converted or were demoralized enough to flee on their own. The dawah became a form of psychological warfare, preparing for a physical expulsion.
You can just imagine Oz sitting there listening to this. A Jew by birth, married to a Muslim woman, preaching the word, and now he's hearing his own people being told to find their escape routes. It must have been devastating.
Devastating. But the absolute breaking point, the detail that shattered whatever remaining faith Oz had in the organization's mission of coexistence, came at the closing event of the course. And this event was led by a man named Mahmoud Hasnat.
Mahmoud Hasnat. The sources describe him as one of the greatest anti-Semites in the world today. What specific detail did Oz witness that became the undeniable, irreversible end?
The detail attributed to Hasnat, which Oz witnessed in person, remember, during this high-level internal course, was horrific. He allegedly called for placing explosive belts on the hostages held in Gaza and detonating.
Okay, we have to just pause and consider the sheer psychological impact of a state. Oz is deeply involved in an organization that, on the outside, promotes tranquility and spirituality. He's sitting in a room with the organizations, and he's not just hearing political rhetoric, he's hearing a high-profile spiritual leader advocate for mass, indiscriminate murder of civilian hostages.
This wasn't just anti-Israel sentiment. This is a call for the most extreme, indiscriminate violence imaginable. And for Oz, it cut through all the layers of self-deception that he had maintained for 5 years. He states it very clearly. This was the moment he realized, quote, I'm cutting ties with them. I don't care, nothing interests. The sheer depravity of that statement just negated any spiritual or philosophical justification he'd previously held for his conversion.
It's a moral catastrophe. It transcends theology. And this is the profound hypocrisy that Oz was now facing head. The Dar al-Center, externally, it's promoting itself as a place of coexistence, tranquility, learning, a destination for schools and tourists learning. They project an image of interfaith harmony.
But behind closed doors, they're organizing activists who openly call for the expulsion of entire communities and the execution of captives. Oz realized the coexistence narrative was just a smokescreen. It was a tool of ideological camouflage. The peace and mutual respect they claimed to promote were a direct, actionable contradiction to the internal hate being preached in Istanbul.
And this revelation of deceit was the final sign that he absolutely had to stop. He realized he wasn't just misled, he was an active participant in a mechanism built on false and aimed at violence. The contradiction was just too extreme for the ideal convert to maintain his dual life anymore. The only path forward was betrayal, betraying the organization, which meant risking everything.
Once Oz made that internal decision to leave, the nature of his existence changed instantly. He went from living a double life based on internal spiritual conflict to operating as, essentially, a defector and an intelligence source. He was still physically embedded within the Islamic Center in Kafkara, still functioning as a sheikh, as a husband.
But mentally, he was out.
Mentally, he was out, and he was actively relaying critical and relevant information about the extremist internal working.
This shift must have been terrifying. I mean, he wasn't trained for this. He was an amateur spy operating inside a structure that had been his home and his spiritual anchor for half. How did the sources detail the operational security he had to?
It required immense, nerve-wracking attention to detail. The sources describe the physical lengths he went to in order to document his finding. He was using hidden cameras and SD cards to collect evidence of the organization's true intentions and ideological alignment. The critical part was always concealment.
And where did he hide these extremely sensitive materials?
He had to find places that were, permanently visible, but culturally or functionally overlooked. Items that most people don't touch or deal with. He mentions, for example, concealing the evidence inside a picture frame in the main salon of his home.
In a picture frame?
Yes, and specifically next to a photo of some of the very extremist figures he was working to expose. The sheer audacity and the psychological strain of hiding evidence of their crimes right beneath their own iconography is just incredible. Every single moment he spent near that frame was a potential exposure.
That level of risk, hiding evidence in plain sight, it just speaks volumes about the level of scrutiny and paranoia he must have been living on. Emotionally, this period must have been tearing him apart. He's not only gathering evidence against his own community, but he's also trying to find his spiritual center.
He was. And the sources reveal this deeply moving response he had to this internal war. To cope and to find strength, he started secretly studying Jewish religious texts.
While he was still a sheikh.
And in this profoundly symbolic act that just encapsulates his entire predicament, he would place pages of these Jewish texts inside Islamic text. He was literally cloaking his original faith under the protective cover of the very identity desperately trying.
It's fascinating. So the secret study wasn't just for spiritual comfort. It was an act of rebellion and affirmation. It was providing the spiritual ballast he needed to withstand the massive cognitive load of his essay.
It was. He felt this secret study was what strengthened him during this extremely complex period. It gave him a spiritual refuge from all the surrounding deception and the growing risk of exposure. But as the investigation progressed, the organization, or at least the individuals around him, they started to sense his distance.
And the final exit itself was sudden and it was centered on the period around the Jewish holidays, a time when his cultural separation would have felt the most.
The timing is very telling. Oz was desperate to leave, desperate to find a way to rebuild his life, but he was paralyzed by fear. Fear for his safety, fear of retaliation, and of course the consequences for his family, for his children.
Right.
The sources mention the organization may have been trying to test his loyalty, perhaps sensing his withdrawal. There was a moment where he was unexpectedly taken on a trip to al-Fam, and when he returned to Kafkara, the tension just reached a breaking point.
And then came the real-time crisis, that final, frantic phone conversation with the people who were documenting.
Yes. In the middle of this final call, Oz's whole demeanor changes completely. He suddenly stated, with sheer frantic urgency, "They are chasing me now."
They are chasing me now.
Yeah. He claimed the center had figured out his intentions and had set up surveillance, a fence, or a definition, as he described the monitoring apparatus. And in that moment of utter panic, he told the hosts, "I am running now."
And then the line went dead.
The line went dead. And that abrupt silence after the phone call, as described by those documenting the story, was very, very difficult. You just realize a life-changing chapter has violently closed. Oz had just exited, fleeing into the complete unknown, leaving the entire life he had built, including his children, behind him. It was a moment of immense, undeniable sacrifice and primal terror.
So what happens then? The immediate practical challenges following that escape must have been overwhelming.
They were. The source material notes that the reunion involved Oz changing both physically and emotionally. He was no longer Ashraf Marwan. He was Oz, and he was a refugee from an ideological prison.
The first priority had to be safe, but right after that comes the psychological and practical recovery. The host, people he was in contact with, they were focused not just on his immediate security, but on his long-term recovery. Sure.
Right. They emphasized the need for him to forgive himself. They acknowledged that he had, quote, a lot to atone for. It won't be. But they stressed the absolute importance of looking forward, of establishing a horizon, a practical plan. Where would he live? What would he do? The weight of self-blame after participating in an organization like that for 5 years is a crushing, crushing burden. The mental transition was every bit as difficult as the physical flight.
And there's a deeply poignant detail about the linguistic separation he faced. Oz admitted he needed to work intensely on his accent, his mifta, after years of immersion in the center's Arabic and the specific culture of Dawa.
That detail is so critical. And for our listeners, we should clarify. Mifta refers to more than just a foreign accent. It's the cadences, the speech pattern, the entire linguistic framework he'd adopt. His language had been fundamentally changed by 5 years of functioning as an Arabic-speaking sheikh in a very specific community.
So to admit he needed to work on his mifta was to admit that he had been separated not just ideologically, but linguistically and culturally from his original.
Exactly. The journey back required relearning not just his faith, but the very way he spoke and signaled his identity. It's just a powerful marker of how deeply submerged he really was.
And the story has to transition here from one of personal escape to the broader context, because the organization he fled, al-Salam, is still operating. So we have to understand how a group with such clear extremist ties manages to survive, and how that strategic survival impacts the wider community.
Oz's personal story, as dramatic as it is, really has to be placed within this larger organizational and legal context described in the source material. Because this mechanism of deception that allowed Dar al-Salam to recruit and embed people like Oz, it's highly structured and it has deep roots.
Let's start with the official response then. The sources highlight that in March 2022, the authorities did take concrete action against the organization's network. An indictment was filed.
That's correct. It was publicly announced at that time that the Shin Bet, or Shabak, and the police had raided the offices of the Central Controlling Organization, which is known as the Al-Quds Aqsa organization, and they shut them down.
Okay.
And crucially, the indictment explicitly stated that this parent organization was a Hamas association. So this isn't theoretical. This is a high-level security finding confirming the ideological and financial threat.
Right. So the average person hears that. They assume that if the parent organization is a designated Hamas association and it's shut down, then all the associated groups, including Dar al-Salam, would face immediate closure and seizure of assets. But the source material notes a significant and pretty chilling loophole.
A huge loophole. Not all branches and offshoots were shut down.
And this is where the structural complexity and the success of the org camouflage really...
It is. Dar al-Salam allegedly fits into that category of an active offshoot. The source alleges that Dar al-Salam remains operational, and even more alarming, that it is allegedly still funded by Hamas, specifically after the devastating events of October 7th.
If the indictment identified the core mechanism as a Hamas association, how can a key node like Dar al-Salam, which organized that extremist course in Islam, how can it continue to function legally? As the sources themselves noted, it's crazy that such a thing is active in this country.
And this brings us to the core operational strategy described by the sources, which they liken to the famous boiling frog analogy. The organization operates within this zone of plausible deniability, leveraging the system's focus on transparency and coexistence.
Let's elaborate on that analogy because it's a perfect metaphor for this kind of gradual, sophisticated ideological takeover. If you put a frog directly into boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cold water and you slowly raise the temperature,
it acclimatizes until it's too late to escape. And the application here is a masterclass in masking radicalism. The cold water is the public facade. Strategies designed to put the public and the authorities to sleep regarding any opposition to their brand of Islam. They successfully leverage messages of coexistence and peace in very visible strategic locations.
Can we get some concrete examples from the sources about this facade? What did they do to project this trend?
Well, they positioned themselves as educational centers. They ran programs aimed at attracting schools, tourists, academics who wanted to learn about moderate Islam. They published the Dar translation of the Quran in Hebrew, which, yes, it was a tool for conversion, but it was also presented publicly as this great academic achievement that fostered dialogue and cultural understanding between Jews and Arabs.
So the center in Kafkara became a destination.
A destination. They hosted tours that showcased their supposed commitment to tranquility and mutual respect.
So if a local authority or a journalist visits, what they see is a peaceful center promoting literacy in holy texts and welcoming tourists. They see the cold water. They don't see the closed-door courses in Istanbul, which is the water slowly...
Exactly. And by consistently lowering the general public's level of resistance or suspicion, by constantly performing coexistence, they create this legal and psychological buffer. And this makes it exponentially harder for the state apparatus, which needs clear evidence of an imminent threat, to effectively fight the underlying extremism when it's so successfully masked by these social and educational programs.
This blurring of lines, this constant messaging of harmony while simultaneously harboring radical ideology and these alleged links to a Hamas. The source characterizes this as blinding the senses, darkening and clouding the public's perception.
The goal, simply put, is ideological paralysis. They want to prevent people from realizing the severity of the threat they face, so that, as the source states, we do not open our eyes and understand what we are facing. This reliance on duplicity is how they survive. They are weaponizing the idea of tolerance itself, using it as a shield while they continue to operate and allegedly receive funding from extremist sources, even after major conflict. That ability to function under indictment is just a testament to the sophistication of the boiling frog myth.
And what's particularly worrying is that this entire mechanism is fueled by the success stories, the converts themselves. The ability to pull in and sustain people like Oz is what gives Oz its credibility. But Oz was not the only person who paid a high price for believing in that facade.
No, not at all. His narrative is powerful, but the center's missionizing efforts had a much wider and in many ways more devastating reach. The disillusionment often hit hardest when the organization's extremist core forced converts to choose between their new ideology and their old family ties.
The sources introduce another case, a Jewish woman they call Tzviana. She also became deeply disillusioned and contacted the people monitoring these activities. And her story highlights the extreme pressure that was applied to converts regarding their children.
Fiana's situation revolved around her young son. She was involved with this organization and was receiving instruction from the same Sheikh al-Din, the one who advised Jews to flee to Europe.
The same guy.
The very same. And he tried to persuade Fiana to convert her child to Islam, advising her on how to bypass any legal or familial complications.
What was the specific, manipulative advice he gave her regarding the child's father?
The advice was a profound violation of trust and parental right. He explicitly told her not to even ask the Jewish father for permission.
Don't even ask.
Don't even ask. He claimed the child was too small to need his father's input. The ideology dictated that the spiritual fate of the child superseded the legal and moral rights of the Jewish parent.
And for Siana, this specific pressure seems to have been her definitive breaking point. It crossed the line from personal spiritual guidance into aggressive manipulation aimed at severing familial ties.
It was the collision of the radical ideology with the practical reality of motherhood and family integrity. She eventually informed the host that she was leaving everything, and it was a decision made in absolute tearing urgency. She said she realized she had to tear off the Band-Aid immediately, or the ideological and familial pressure would just consume her entirely.
And this pressure system, it doesn't just affect the converts. It affects their original Jewish families who have to watch helplessly as their loved ones are, ideologically captured. The source includes the harrowing perspective of a mother whose daughter had converted and married a Muslim man after getting involved with similar groups.
And for this mother, the final, agonizing breaking point came not from her daughter, but from her son-in-law. She received a post from him glorifying the murder of a Jew.
Glorify.
Yes, claiming that God had come to take revenge. That act of celebrating violence, directed towards her own community and witnessed by the mother, made the true nature of her daughter's captivity undeniable.
And she states that her daughter is essentially a hostage of Hamas.
A hostage of Hamas. And this is a crucial distinction she makes. She emphasizes that while the injury isn't strictly physical, her daughter isn't being physically held in Gaza. Her soul is already worn out. The individual is held hostage by the ideology, by the social structure, and by the consequences of leaving. The psychological and spiritual captivity is continuous and deeply, deeply traumatizing.
And the psychological toll, it leads us to the most difficult hurdle faced by the converts who successfully return, the internal reckoning. They have to confront the reality of their 5+ years of dedication to a fundamentally full organization that sought harm against their own people.
And the source material captures that internal confession, which is often harder than running in the dark. The converts who return, they admit that the most difficult step is the admission to themselves. I was wrong. I made the mistake that everyone warned me I would make.
That acceptance of shame and error and vulnerability, after maintaining such a high degree of confidence and spiritual authority as a Shiite, that is often harder than the physical act of escape itself, because it involves the total collapse of their chosen reality and their self-identity.
It is the psychological equivalent of an extreme trauma, compounded by the knowledge that they were actively participating in an organization that served as a mask for groups like Hamas. The road back requires processing not just the past ideological lie, but the crushing self-blame that comes with realizing you were the golden egg in a mechanism of deception.
And the community they return to has to provide the framework for recovery, which starts with accepting that mistake and offering a path.
It has.
The journey detailed in these sources, this path from ideal convert to a fugitive running in the dark, is a powerful testament to the complexity of ideological warfare and deception. Oz's successful, albeit terrifying, return highlights the immense challenge of rebuilding a shattered identity, and it's complicated by the very human fear of the future. He expressed this so well, capturing the anxiety of the unknown. He said, "I know what was, and I know it was bad, and I don't know what will be, and I'm afraid bad."
And that fear is entirely rational. When your reality has been fundamentally manipulated for years, establishing trust and certainty again is an enormous undertaking. The recovery process requires more than just physical security. It necessitates a focus on positive thought, on building internal resilience, often drawing back on the very faith they tried to leave. The advice given to him was simple but profoundly difficult to practice. Accustom yourself to think good. You have to consciously rewire your thought process away from the darkness and duplicity you experience.
The final anecdotes from the source material, they provide that necessary emotional closure, and they emphasize the power. When Oz finally returned, there was an emotional, ceremonial a blessing.
Powerful moment of community and reaffirmation. It emphasizes that his identity as a Jew was waiting for him, regardless of his past error. The words spoken to him capture that sense of acceptance and protection. You are our brother, the Lord protect you. It shifts the focus entirely from the devastating mistakes of the past 5 years to the potential and the promise of the future. The community accepts him not for what he did, but for who he fundamentally.
This entire deep dive centered on the organizational sophistication of Dar al-Salam's boiling frog strategy and the sheer emotional and physical difficulty of escape for individuals like Oz and Sviana. It really leaves us with a necessary challenge for self-reflection.
It does. The source material meticulously describes a complex process of manipulation, a mechanism designed to confuse, co-opt, and ultimately paralyze detection by leveraging messages of peace while harboring calls for violence. So if highly intellectual and committed individuals who achieve the status of sheikh and were embedded in that mechanism for half a decade could be so thoroughly convinced by a structure built on fundamental duplicity, what does that tell you about the sophistication required to detect and resist ideological deception and propaganda, especially when it comes dressed in the language of coexistence and spiritual inquiry in your own life and in the broader world?
A vital question for a well-informed mind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.